I continue to believe the Big Ten and the SEC don't care about anyone but themselves.
You are Locked On College Football, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day and your daily source to stay up to date with the biggest stories in the greatest sport on planet Earth, realignment, coaching carousel, the portal, and so much more. We've always got you covered. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends over at LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. So, lots to get to. Dakorien Moore decommits from LSU. Is he locked into Texas? Maybe, maybe not. We'll check in with Brian Smith later on today's show. And Florida beats out Washington and Arizona for Elijah Badger. Love that pickup for the Gators, all coming up on today's show. But we start with the Big Ten and the SEC, who I don't think have the best interests of the sport in mind. When I say that, I am not saying they don't understand what the landscape looks like and how they can utilize it to benefit themselves. What I am saying is that there are large swaths of people that get impacted by power player conferences whose power has been consolidating and growing over the last several months and years in college football. And I have not seen an indication that the Big Ten and SEC decision makers really care about the sport, more about what the sport can do for them. You know, what can Brown do for you? That's the way the Big Ten and the SEC are looking at college football, at least through my lens. I bring this up today because there is a big settlement that is getting closer to a resolution. I don't know if it's necessarily imminent, but it's the big lawsuit, House v. NCAA, in which damages are being sought by the plaintiffs for, past money that was not paid because the NCAA said, no, you can't pay the players and whatnot. We're an antitrust exemption, and there's all this sort of legal jargon and whatnot. And the damages are expected to be in about the $2.7 billion range. So the discussions ongoing about how to pay out that money are actively taking place. And what they are reporting is that the Big Ten, SEC, and other power conferences too, but I have a sneaky suspicion the Big Ten and the SEC are leading the charge here. They are not concerned with anybody else or what is right and just in any of these sorts of situations. So the way this is expected to get played out is over the next 10 years, conferences will pay millions and millions of dollars to the plaintiffs in the lawsuit. But somehow, and I am unclear as to how exactly this has come to be, the NCAA is going to pay this money, and it's not all going to come from the power leagues. Not even the appropriate share, reportedly, is not going to come from the power leagues, who have, of course, been dominating college football and men's basketball, which is where these lawsuits are really stemming from primarily. So, for instance, the West Coast Conference, which, like the Big East, is a basketball-only league, is expected to pay annually between $3.5 million and $4.3 million for the next decade, right? So you're not going to just have $2.7 billion laying around. It's going to get paid in installments, and the conferences are going to pay it out. But here's where it gets rather tricky. You have got conferences paying more than they should because the Big Ten and SEC have worked it out so that they don't have to pay everything that they reportedly should. Oh, this is according to Pete Thamel, writing over at ESPN.com. You can go read the whole piece if you want. But he says, quote, according to a source, one smaller non-power football league was told in the NCAA memo that it would be expected to pay more than $2.5 million per year to help cover the costs of the settlement. A source in that CCA 22 league said that amount is approximately 25% of the annual NCAA revenue for the schools in the league. It goes on, quote, we're not named in the lawsuit, said a source in a smaller league. We don't have a voice in any of this. We're just being told what our taxation is. It sounds, end quote. It sounds just a little bit like this old adage in American history folklore, taxation without representation. Do we all remember how that went down? This can't resemble that in any way, shape, or form, because eventually the American colonies decided, we're tired of this, and they kicked the British out. The smaller conferences cannot do that. And the tough spot they're in is that if the Big Ten and the SEC say, we're looking for, we're looking for a lesser payout. We don't want to pay quite as much as we might. Oh, because this ESPN piece goes on to say there's a counter to those, I went to the wrong part. Quote, this is incredibly unfair. This is another source in a CCA 22 league. This is incredibly unfair and has a dramatic impact. I'm losing about 10% of my operating budget. Do I cut 2 staff members in order for money to go to Zion Williamson? 90% of the money in the suit projects to go to Power 5 football and men's basketball players. The 40% payment for the Power Conference isn't proportionate, because that's what the power conferences are going to be expected to pay. 60% is expected to come from leagues outside the Power 5. That is just straight up incredibly greedy. And if these conferences didn't even have a say in the matter, they're just sitting around and being told what to do. Well, if you don't like it, guess what? Too bad. That's what they're being told, and they have no leverage. And it reminds me a little bit of the Big 12 and the ACC kind of looking afar at the Big 10 and the SEC, hoping they don't pull away. The Big 10 and the SEC come to the table and they say, well, we're going to have 29% of the college football playoff revenue each, and you guys are going to get 17 and 14%. Well, we're all Power League, and you're going to get 17 and 14%. Well, shouldn't we and you're going to get 17 and 14%. Okay, fine, that's what's going to happen, because there's nothing they can do about it. And so I think this is another example. It's on a smaller scale compared to the Big Ten and SEC, and that's what kind of bugs me about this, is that the amount of money annually getting doled out by these conferences to, mostly football and men's basketball players who should have gotten money from media rights revenue or whatnot, or however the lawsuit is working out. I haven't read the text of it because, that's for lawyers. So they're not looking at this situation and saying, well, we can take that cost, and if we're liable for this, then we're going to pay, what's proportional and everything like that. But they're not doing that. They're saying, no, let's dell some costs out. Let's shell out some costs to the smaller conferences who can't afford it as much. The West Coast Conference doesn't have football. They just have men's basketball as a revenue generating sport, getting NCAA tournament units and getting a television contract and everything, which is not as lucrative in college basketball compared to college football. And they just have to pay it. They just have to do it. Doesn't mean they weren't liable for anything, but for more than half of the money for these payouts, again, 60% is expected to come from leagues outside the Power 5 conference and 40% coming from the power conferences. Follow the money. Follow the money. Where was that money not going where, according to the lawsuit, it should have been going? Major power football and basketball conferences. And 60% is going to go to everybody else who don't have as much money and can't as readily absorb the costs. This is why I say, the more I look at the Big Ten and SEC, the more I get a little bit anxious, just thinking, man, I don't think they're looking out for anything but themselves. And they don't care who gets hurt or what's damaged or anything in the like. They're just not worried about it. They're just going forward and saying, we got power. We're going to flex it. Not in a good way. We're just going to run the sport the way we see fit. And I don't know if that's moving in the best direction. I hope it does. Haven't seen any indications yet. Dakorien Moore, 5-star wideout, number 1 guy at his position in class of 2025. Decommits from LSU. Is he going to Texas? That's coming up next. Before we talk Dakorien Moore, let's talk LinkedIn jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job, but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. That's why 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. LSU five-star commit Dakorien Moore decommits from the Tigers. Is he bound to go to Texas? Brian Smith, our Locked On Recruiting Insider here, joining me on the show, brought to you by our friends at LinkedIn Jobs. Brian, is this all Texas, or are other schools going to have a chance at a guy who is just ridiculously talented?
I think it's the latter. He's looked at Ohio State. He's looked at Oregon, obviously committed at one point to LSU. The in-state schools are not going anywhere. Texas is trending, if you will, as I use air quotes for those of you not on YouTube. But it doesn't matter because he's so good. He's going to get recruited from now through signing day. There might be a program that ends up getting a visit, like a Georgia or Bama or whoever, that may not be expected by somebody right now. If he visited Florida State or Miami or something, would it be shocking? No. So he's just a really good player. And if he decommitted, he's looking a little broader. So there's nothing wrong with the LSU pick. They've got a five-star quarterback committed. But I would hold your horses on thinking that it's just going to be Texas.
Why do you think he decommitted from LSU? Any insight or just your best guess?
I don't know. I never heard anything specific from the LSU people because they did everything right. They bring Bryce Underwood down when he came for trips. He's been multiple times. I think it's just that he's gotten recruited by so many other schools. He gains more by just wandering around and going to visits. He can because he's a five-star. Kids that aren't five stars can't get away with this with LSU. It's just true. The old saying is your leash is longer when you got more talent. Dakorien Moore is that guy. So might be the best player in the country at wide receiver this year. So he's going to get a little more time to do what he wants to do.
Everything looked immediately after the decommitment like it was Texas. There were crystal balls. There was buzz. It was Texas Tech. He's, of course, a Texas kid. Is Texas seen as the leader in your view right now?
That's what everybody says. I haven't spoken to Dakorien, but that's the easy low-hanging fruit. I learned this a long time ago. When a kid decommits and there's a prominent in-state program, they're usually, he's just going to go to the local school. It's the low-hanging fruit. Again, this is a kid that's going to take visits. OVs, I bet he takes at least 3 this summer, if not more, and he probably has an opportunity to take some in the fall. He's a five-star. He can because he said so. I don't care what he says right now. I care what happens. And speculation sells a lot of clicks and gets a lot of advertisers happy too. So Texas is an easy sell in that regard. They got a massive fan base, and they do have a great passing game. I mean, I get it, but he's going to take a lot of other visits. I don't even care if he commits to Texas. It doesn't mean much to me.
Yeah, I mean, I think Texas is certainly a spot that has to be appealing with what Steve Sarkisian does in the passing game. You have Arch Manning in line to be the next quarterback, and he looked fantastic in Texas's spring game and appears poised to take the reins from Quinn Ewers next year when Quinn goes off to the NFL. But it's still relatively early in the recruiting process, Brian. We're talking about a 2025 kid who probably ends up signing his national letter of intent in December in the early signing window. That's when the bulk, though not all, that's when the bulk of recruiting classes are finalized, is on that day. But still, December is a long ways away. Do you think there's any chance that LSU can get him back into the fold?
100%. LSU's not a hard sell, especially for a Dallas kid. They've gotten kids out of there forever. And again, they have Bryce Underwood committed. By most people's accounts, he's the most physically gifted kid in the entire 25 class, regardless of position. And it just happens that Moore's a receiver, so that's not hard. They need to get him back on campus, though. Sooner than later, obviously, they need to get him to a game in Death Valley this fall. But I just don't see what the hard sell is. They throw it around. They've got quarterbacks, etc. He probably just wants to look around. I don't look at this as big a deal for LSU as some might, but at the same time, he's a 5-star, so he can go wherever he wants.
Yeah, and I mean, he's a supremely talented guy. This is not some accidental 5-star rating, or he can grow into that. Like he seems to me, a different sort of style. But the Ryan Williams, Cam Coleman element, where you step in, and even in the SEC, you play right away, and that's why we're talking about him for an entire segment here on the show. This is a big time player in the class of 2025. You and I recently talked about Juju Lewis as well, 5-star quarterback who's verbally committed to USC. He has not decommitted, but everybody else is trying to get him to flip. It is that sort of season, and Dakorien is a guy that's going to attract that sort of attention because he's a big time player. Now, according to Ducks Wire at USA Today, he's got a visit scheduled for this summer, one to Ohio State and one to Oregon. I believe Ohio State is first and then Oregon is second, kind of towards the end of June. What do you make of those schools reportedly having those visits and nobody else being in the mix to get one of those, at least at this time?
I don't look at it anything other than he's just checking them out. Again, he'll take trips in the fall too. If I'm Texas, I'd rather have the November visit, because it's closer to signing day. That's how I would look at it. Again, I could care no less whether he's committed to a school or not. And I know coaches look at it differently. I just look at end result, and that's it. He's going to take visits this fall too. So should you use your OB in the summer or the fall? If you take it this summer, you need to knock him out. There can't be any doubt. So Ohio State and Oregon are taking let's just figure it out right now. Where do we stand? Not that he couldn't take an unofficial as well, but an official visit right before signing day is oftentimes the death knell for other schools. So I'll be curious to see who does that. So I don't worry about the summer visit as much if I'm one of the other schools.
If you're trying to get him on campus for a visit during the fall to showcase a particular game, are you showing him a game you feel like you're going to win, or do you showcase a game that is going to have big stakes and have a big feel? The crowd has that extra juice, but you have the potential to lose. You're a head coach deciding which of those two games you want to take a kid like this on a visit for. Which one are you going after?
If it's going to be a smaller list of kids, there's a lot of things with this. I'll take the big game. The atmosphere, like at Outson, Ohio State, Clemson, whatever the school is, those game days are just incredible. If a kid's not interested in that, he's probably not the right guy for you. That's kind of how I look at it. And you're going to be able to see, if you're Dakorien, where do I fit? And he fits in anywhere because he's better than most of the college kids he's going to be competing with. He's that kind of player. So I don't think that matters. You're going to be able to showcase him by saying you're the extra piece that gets us over the top to get us a ring. That's what every school is going to be telling him. And it's actually very possible. He's that kind of player. So I would bring him into the big game.
What makes him so special?
Speed and just the ability to make guys look dumb in one-on-one situations. You have to see him live to understand, but he'll high point the football like a 6'5" guy, and he's maybe 6 foot. He just has.
He's listed 5'11".
Yeah, so and he just runs by everybody. He's running by guys in Dallas like they're standing still. Dallas football is really good. So elite player. He did it on the national stage at the Future 50 last summer. He's a kid we've known about for a few years. He's at a dominant high school program. There's nothing not to like about Dakorien Moore.
Yeah, Duncanville High School, right out there in Texas. That's one of the big time programs in that state, and Dakorien certainly just the latest in a long line of players to come out of that high school. Brian Smith, our Locked On Recruiting Insider, brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. Brian, thank you as always.
Absolutely, sir.
Elijah Badger made his pick. He's a Florida Gator, and I think it's a huge, huge pickup. But does it alter their season outlook? That's coming up next. Before we talk Gators, let's talk FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. It's got everything you could possibly want for college football gambling. Individual games can be wagered upon. National title odds, Heisman odds, conference championship odds, win totals, everything's over there. Even the group of 5 win totals in the Mountain West and American Conference are there. So go check them out at FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every playoff shot count and get your college football gambling fix as well. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook and our official sportsbook sponsor here at the Locked On Network. Florida lands Elijah Badger. I love this move for the Gators. How much of a difference will that actually make, though? Because Florida has the toughest schedule in college football. I don't know if there's a close second. I'm sure the comment section can find me a second place finisher in that department. It's pretty tough to top Florida's schedule. It's incredibly brutal, as we'll get to, but the Badger addition is a really good piece for this offense. I think if the Gators unlock their passing game with Graham Mertz this year, Elijah Badger can be a 1,000-yard receiver. I said going into his transfer recruitment that he was the most impactful player remaining in the portal. And I think that's going to bear itself out on the field this year. You pair him with Trey Wilson and Khalil Jackson as the wide receivers, and you got Wilson in the slot, Jackson on the outside, Badger on the other side, and suddenly you have a formidable trio of receivers for Graham Mertz to throw the ball to. And certainly last year, Ricky Pearsall was an excellent weapon. Elijah Badger is a different type of weapon, though. I think this is someone who can not just stretch the field vertically, but give you a little bit more in 50-50 situations. Maybe I haven't watched enough Ricky Pearsall film, but to me, he seems kind of like Deebo Samuel adjacent. And Badger's a different type of receiver. And I think this is a bona fide, certified, #1 caliber guy. And I love this addition for an offense that has had its moments, shall we say, with Graham Mertz at the helm, hasn't always been prolific pushing it down the field. I really think this is a good move. And I think Badger can come in to the SEC and have a really good year. Now, does this make Florida a dramatically better team? Not dramatically, makes them a better offense at the very least. And you're going to go up against some great offenses. So, for those who have forgotten Florida's schedule, let's bring out the Titanic violin music here. They open with Miami in Gainesville. That is one of my favorite non-conference games of the college football season. Florida's making the rounds in the state of Florida. They play Miami, they play UCF later, and they play Florida State. They're really making sure they get, I'm surprised FIU isn't on the schedule. Maybe they should be, or FAU for that matter. But you start with Miami. That's not easy. Then you play Samford. Okay, that's easy. Then you host Texas A&M. Not easy. Interesting game, though. Interesting game. Because you have Mike Elko, year 1, versus Billy Napier, year 3. Interesting. Very interesting. Then they go at Mississippi State, and then they host UCF. Those better be 2 wins. I'll just say that. And when you look up and down this lineup of teams, you've got some prolific offenses. I don't know that any of them are actually in the first 5 games. Is Connor Wegman going to pop at Texas A&M? Is Cam Ward, who I think is very good, going to kind of have the reins taken off of him in a Mario Cristobal offense at Miami? We shall see. UCF, don't sleep on that game. It's in Gainesville. It's in the cozy confines of the swamp. You can't sleep on the Knights, though. They are doing a lot of really good things in the transfer portal themselves. But then the challenges arrive. At Tennessee, host Kentucky for homecoming. By the way, Brock Vandagriff will be the quarterback for Kentucky. Nico Iamaleava will be the quarterback for Tennessee. Georgia, Florida, of course, is going to be played. And yeah, Carson Beck and company. Look, Brock Bowers, Ladd McConkey, great players. I have a sneaky suspicion that Georgia's going to have some weapons on the perimeter for Carson Beck to throw the football to. Quinn Ewers, as they go at Texas the following week. LSU, oh dear, Ole Miss, and then at Florida State. Just look at the lineup of quarterbacks that you're going up against, and that explains perfectly why I like this Elijah Badger move when you're going up against this schedule with Graham Mertz. Tennessee, Nico Iamaleava. Kentucky, Brock Vandagriff. Relatively unproven, but a lot of potential there. Georgia, Carson Beck, maybe the best in all of college football. Quinn Ewers, Texas. Also, perhaps the best in all of college football. Probably second. I like Carson Beck. LSU, Garrett Nussmeier. Okay, that's a little bit more of a question. Ole Miss, Jackson Dart. No questions there. And Florida State, DJ Uiagalelei. Probably the weakest quarterback you face in this entire slate, depending on what Iamaleava and Vandegrift are able to accomplish. So if you're going up against those teams with a defense that, as Brandon Olson of Locked On Gators has talked about before, has some questions. They have made improvements. They are not going to be an elite unit. They just are not. You're going to have to score points. And Graham Mertz, look, he's steady. He's solid. He's fairly consistent. But is he explosive? Is he dynamic? Is he carrying you? No, he's a guy who needs to be supported. Think closer to the lines of Kirk Cousins in the NFL than Josh Allen, per se. Not someone who you're running your offense through, someone you're running your offense with who you hope can execute. Where has Kirk Cousins been most effective? In Minnesota, when he had who? Justin Jefferson. Elijah Badger is not Justin Jefferson. I'm not making that silly comparison because that might be the best wide receiver on the face of the planet right now. But what I am saying is that when you've got a quarterback who is serviceable, solid, capable, he is elevated significantly by the weapons around him, rather than the inverse can often be true, in which a quarterback makes his receivers better. This is an instance where I think the receivers can make the quarterback better, and Badger brings that to the table. So I really like that move for Florida. And look, I wouldn't be surprised if you feel a little bit better having Elijah Badger there after watching the first half of the season against Kentucky, for instance, who's not going to be a bad football team. I don't know if they're going to be a great football team. They certainly won't be terrible under Mark Stoops. And you just keep going down the list and say, well, I'd rather have an extra weapon than not have one. And the schedule, just having both Miami and Florida State in the non-conference with UCF is bonkers, frankly. It's bonkers. And if you're Billy Napier, you have to be thinking, who put together this schedule that is going to make me look like I'm a worse coach than I am, that's going to make my team look like a worse team than we are? Because that's what you're going to have. If Florida goes through and wins, let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, if they win 5 games, I honestly think they're doing great. We'll call it good. Why don't we call that good? If they make a bowl game, give Billy Napier an extension. That's how difficult a situation this is. But Elijah Badger certainly does lessen the blow. Another transfer to be aware of, not a huge name necessarily, but one to just keep your eye on, King Mack. 2023 4-star safety, originally from Fort Lauderdale, speaking of Florida, committed to play at Penn State, did not play a lot last year, just 70 snaps. PFF was impressed on the 70 snaps that he did log for the Nittany Lions, but he is transferring to Alabama. Remember, this is an Alabama team that lost a bunch of players to the transfer portal. A lot of them. They did, once upon a time, begin the process, and they are continuing the process of backfilling those losses. I think King Mack is at some level a replacement for Peyton Woodyard, who transferred out and went to go play up at Oregon, where I don't think he's going to start this year. Might be a rotation guy, potentially, but that's what King Mack is providing. I texted Luke Robinson of Locked On Alabama about this and said, look, he adds much needed depth, has got the playmaking potential, has got the capability, and Kane Womack, the defensive coordinator, former head coach of South Alabama, he's looking for pieces like this to build, not just for this year, but for next year. And it's weird to say, it's also realistic to say, Bama might be underrated. Bama might be getting slept on. I think this is going to be the worst Kalen DeBoer Alabama coach team that we ever see. I think that's going to be a fit. But what does worst Kalen DeBoer Alabama team look like? That's like saying, what's the worst dessert you could make with chocolate and peanut butter? Well, just putting them together would be bland and boring. Still tastes good. Still might be better than some random concoction over there. But if you then, give it a little bit of time and put some work into the chocolate and peanut butter, eventually you can make a chocolate peanut butter pie that is just a heavenly, delectably rich and decadent sweet treat. So I think Bama could be at least, bare minimum, they're an 8-win team. That's like the bottom falls out this year. And I don't know if King Mac makes a huge impact, but they're just starting to load up the depth, the talent, and I'm seeing it. And here's the other thing, and I'll get out of here on this. The questions about Kalen DeBoer when he first got to Alabama were, how is he going to be able to recruit? He didn't recruit well at Washington. He's going to recruit. Is he going to bring in high caliber players? Well, so far, looking pretty darn good. And I like the addition of King Mac from Penn State. Might not make a huge impact this year, but I think is telling about the defensive staff they put together and what they can be going forward. Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time. And until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.